from the Library of Congress and the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture.
We're running. Good afternoon. Today is April 16th, 2013.
April 15th.
April 15th, 2013, thank you. And today we are in Palo Alto, California, on behalf of the Civil Rights History Project, supported by the Congress, the Library of Congress, the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture, and this project is also supported by the Southern Oral History Program at UNC Chapel Hill. My name is David Cline. I'll be the interviewer today. With me is videographer John Bishop of Media Generation and UCLA. And we have with us today Dr. Clarence Jones. And I just want to say thank you so much for spending time with us today.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
My pleasure. I'm glad to be here. I just, out of deference to my mother, I'd like for you to use my middle initial when you are putting it in the archives, Clarence B. Jones. My middle name is Benjamin. And so that she seemed to be very much endeared to that name. Mm-hmm. So as an adult, I've carried it forward.
Wonderful.
Okay.
Thank you for letting us know that. And so let's start there, since
Okay.
we're there, with your birth parents and a little bit about your childhood.
Okay.
Where that brought you.
My parents were domestic servants when I was born. I was born over 82 years ago this past January, 1931, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. When I said my parents were domestic workers, specifically my mother was a maid and a cook. My father was a chauffeur and a gardener. And they worked as a domestic servant couple for Eleanor Lippincott of the Lippincott family. Lippincott family out of Philadelphia and into publishing, into grain, and but a very established, wealthy family. And Eleanor Lippincott was one of the grand dames of the family, who employed my parents. When I was born, apparently they did not have a home of their own. So the home in which I came into was the home of the place where they worked. And I can remember before the age of about 6 years of age, being placed at least with 3 different foster families. And by that I mean these were adult friends of my parents, who my parents had made some arrangements. I guess you keep young Clarence, let him stay as part of the family, and so I was placed with different families. This happened at least on 3 occasions before about the age of 6 years of age. Again, I don't know what prompted my mother and father to do it, principally my mother. Decided that they would place me in a boarding school, for foster children and orphans, or specifically for indigent, foster, and orphan colored boys and Indians, run by the Order of the Blessed Sacrament, and I think also by the Order of the Sacred Heart. The nuns who ran the religious order that ran the Catholic boarding school for colored boys, orphans, and foster children, also maintained mission schools in Arizona and in New Mexico on the Navajo reservations. And as a consequence, as a young boy in this boarding school for colored and Indian children, several of the boys there were Indians. And very early on, I got accustomed to seeing a boy with the long pigtail, a long ponytail, or sometimes his hair would be knotted or braided, and be a feather or a band. And I remember classmates of mine, people in the school, having names like Little Bear, and Running Bear, and Something Deer, and those are their names. Okay. That's where I stayed from about the age of 6 years of age. By the way, this was a Catholic private boarding. So now the interesting thing about this, you notice I said there were foster children and orphans. I was neither. I had parents. Right. And it became clear to me that there was something wasn't right here, a little contradiction, because what would happen, I was there from about the age of 6 until 13, almost 14. My parents would come to visit me, and they would leave. And some of the other boys would say to me, "Well, why are you here? Why don't they take you with them?" And it's very hard for a young person to understand that. During the summers, I spent 3 or 4 weeks in the summer with my parents wherever they in the summer they usually, the woman they worked for took a house, had a summer house on the Jersey Shore, and a place called Longport near Margate in Atlantic City. So they would be there all summer, and I would go down and visit them during the summer, so I had that break.
And that's the only time you would actually stay with them?
Yes, that's the only time. I didn't have Christmas with them, didn't have Easter, didn't have holidays with them. But during the holidays, I had with them. I mean, during the summer. And when I was in about the 7th grade, 6th or 7th grade, I developed a serious stuttering problem. And it was a surprise. They couldn't understand why I had begun to stammer. So, and I think as I look back on it, and as I moved on to public high school with the help of a speech teacher and just different kind of pressures operating on me, I guess, I was able to overcome the stammering. You wouldn't know that I stuttered and stammering the way I speak now and the way I have spoken. But the fact is, and I as I look back on it, I think it was that not understanding, Now, someone might listen to this story and have a certain degree of pathos and say, well, it's a sad thing that Master Jones, that little boy, went through, so forth. Well, yes and no. As I've gotten older, without question, I knew I was cared for and loved. Those Irish nuns loved me. They were my surrogate mothers. They loved me and with a sense of discipline, that stayed with me during my formative years. I put it this way. Had I not gone to that Catholic boarding school, I probably would have been placed in a de jure, or meaning by law, or de facto segregated school. And I probably would have gotten an inferior education compared to the education I actually received. Because as a result of going to this Catholic boarding school, our classes of maybe about 25 boys, but there were 2 nuns, okay? I got exempted from taking Latin in high school because I had had so much Latin in private school, albeit religious Latin, but a lot of Latin. My publisher of the first book, what Martin say, HarperCollins, one of the editors said to me, and aside from the organization of the story in which we're going to say, Mr. Jones, we noticed that, you know, there are hardly any errors, any grammatical errors. You know, I mean, there's some writers, you know, writers with big names and so forth, and we were amazed. And so I said to them, I said, well, let me tell you, you should not be surprised, because I think that it is still today, it is congenitally impossible for me to write a grammatically incorrect sentence in the English language. And the reason that is so is because I learned grammar by diagram sentences, which in and of itself was not so special. But I learned to do it correctly because when I did it incorrectly, there would be a pointer that would hit my knuckles. And I would say, you know better than that, Master Jones. So I'm 82 years old, and I can still, over all those years, feel that sense of correction. But
There's always a nun right over
always a nun, but gave me a sense of writing correctly, and then I had a great sense for the words. So
we pause for just a second, David. We're back.
We're back, great. And I will say, we'll, because this is digital recording that we're doing, we'll pause every once in a while just to save the files.
okay,
So
fine.
we'll take some they're very brief.
Okay, very good. I'll do that.
So back to talking about this upbringing, and I wanted to ask too that, you know, this was this school for colored boys, right? But it was, I mean, you had the nuns there. It was sort of a multiracial world that you were exposed
Well,
to.
not so much. Well, multiracial to the extent that the nuns were white, but the other students, they're all colored boys and Native Americans. Later on, we'll get a chance to talk about my later life with Martin Luther King Jr., and I don't want to go there now, but I do want to use this as an example. One day, Dr. King made a comment to me, something like, you know, Clarence, you really can get very angry at racism or racial injustice. And you really are angry, but you know, you're not anti-white. And what do you account for being that angry? How do you account for that? And I said, well, I think it's because as a young Negro boy growing up, spending more time quantitatively with Irish nuns than I spent quantitatively with my parents at a critical point in my life. Let's just break that down. The dominant interaction of love and affection and discipline I had was from white, older women, okay? And they made it very clear to me and to others when they were disciplining us, or whether I had hurt myself and I was crying, they would hold me They would comfort me. They would discipline me. But they did it with unconditional love. So, I'm not qualified to be a psychiatrist, or I'm just looking at this young boy, that's got to have had some impact. If during those formative years, my result is a positive. My result is to get nothing but love and affection from these white adult women. That's what I got. I didn't get hate. I got love and affection. I got love and affection from my parents when I saw them. But they were my surrogate parents for a period of time. So that's my long way of saying, I said, Martin, Dr. King, I think that's the reason. I can clinically, intellectually see racism for what it is. But it's the ideology of white supremacy. It's not the white person I hate or I dislike. So it's just a little bit of digression. So, so then I went, but had I not gone there, so the consequence of going there was I got a better education, right? So when I went to public high school, as I said, I was exempted from having taken any Latin, but I went to public high school, I did very well. I was the president, I became the president of the Honor Society, had virtually all A's. The school was Palmyra High School, Palmyra, New Jersey, in Burlington County. I think my class, maybe a class of about 100 or 200, maybe a class of about 150, 160. Maybe I would say 40% of the class were colored boys and girls. This is now 1945 to 1949. Okay, high school, 1945 to 1949. My classmates, 60% or more of whom were white, voted me as the most likely to succeed. Okay? They voted the boy in the class most likely to succeed. And they voted some young white girl classmate of mine whose name I can't remember now. But I was voted most likely to succeed. And was asked to be the class speaker on behalf of the Honor Society, speaking for my class. In my junior year in high school, near the end of my junior year, beginning of my senior year, I went down to the Navy and I tried to enlist. The Navy had something called a V-12 program at that time. If you enlisted in the V-12 program, you went into the Navy for 4 or 6 years, but the thing is, they sent you to college for 4 years. Right. I think it was 6 years. And so I did that. Problem is, you had to be 18. So I went down and, quote, enlisted and signed before I was 18. And so I get called into the principal's office one day and said, we just got a call from a naval recruiting station that said you went down and enlisted. Why did you lie about your age? Well, this is so-and-so. I said, I did it because I want to be able to go to college. And they said, who says you're not going to go to college? I said, well, there's no way I have no money to go to college. And they said, you're going to go to college, Clarence. We're very proud of you, so-and-so. The bottom line is the principal, my speech teacher, and my science teacher, they all took money out of their own pockets in order to pay for the application fees for me to apply to college. So I applied to Syracuse, University of Pennsylvania. Yale, and Columbia University. I got into all of them. Syracuse, because I had been a musician, offered me a 4-year band scholarship, music scholarship.
What did you play?
Clarinet. Clarinet. I was a professional musician when I was 16 and a half, 17 years old. While I was in school during the summers, I came to New York during the summers, and I went to the Juilliard School of Music. I've become a fairly good instrumentalist. In any event, so I lost my train of thought.
Applying to college and you got.
Oh yeah, you got Syracuse offered me, right? Sorry, Syracuse offered me, and I didn't know anything about Syracuse. Somebody said, "Oh, well, it's already cold, way cold up there." Plus, my mother's brother she had a brother, my uncle, for whom I am named, Clarence. He lived in New York, and so he was an influence in my getting into Columbia College, Columbia University. In order for me to go, I had to get a financial aid package, a scholarship. In order to get a financial aid package, a scholarship, I had to maintain a B- average, which was not easy to do. And in fact, I say to my friends out here in Silicon Valley who were interested in computer science and physics, and I said I thought I was going to meet my academic Waterloo because I had 2 Nobel scientists for teachers. One was Linus Pauling for chemistry. I did reasonably well in chemistry. But the other person was a man by the name of Polycarp Kush. Polycarp Kush got the Nobel Prize for physics. And I've never knew up until that time what it was to go to class every day in sheer fear. I never was afraid. And I was afraid on two reasons. One, I was afraid I was going to be called on, and I didn't understand, but it was a very difficult course for me. And 2, I figured that I had to get a C+. I could not fail this course because it would jeopardize my B- average. I got a C+ in physics. That's the only C+ I got. I got the rest were B's, B-, and A's and so forth. But it was my Waterloo. My teachers helped me do this.
Did you maintain contact with your parents?
Well, I'm gonna say yes. When I don't know what the economy was, but I'm trying to remember. I think that Mrs. Lippincott died at some point. And my father stayed on as a caretaker of the place, but my mother took a job in Westchester County, New York, and she would come back home about twice a month. But when I was in Columbia, she would be in New York, and on her days off, I would be able to see her. Or one of the more touching things I remember, I was always working. I worked at the dining hall tables for food, and then for extra money, there used to be a chain similar to Starbucks. Only Starbucks would probably be offended if I said the chain was called Needix. It was a Needix hot dog, and if anybody talks about Needix, it's like Nathan's Frankfurters. You date yourself, people. You date yourself and tell you what part of the country you grew up in. So I worked at a Needix on 42nd Street, Lexington Avenue, and one day I'm working at Mahana, counter. I look up and there's my mother sitting at the counter. You know, she came down to see me and so forth and worked. Very, you know, it was a movie. Now I'm going to tell you something that probably, I would say that it's the education I got at the Catholic boarding school, Cornwells Heights it was called, in Cornwells, Pennsylvania. It was in Eastern, Eastern, geographically, Pennsylvania. I would say being at that school and then going to Columbia, and while I was at, even before I got to Columbia, becoming an accomplished clarinetist, you know, gave me some sense of confidence, you know, because I was the first clarinetist in the orchestra, first clarinetist in the band, and then the singular achievement at that time, they had the state of New Jersey had a New Jersey All-State Orchestra, which you auditioned for. And in my senior year, I was the first clarinetist for the, you know, now there's some humorous little side stories. I learned to play jazz, and there was a theater in New York called the Earl Theater. That was like the Apollo Theater in New York. And the Earl Theater used to have an amateur hour. And, you know, what happens, you'd go in for one ticket, you see a movie and you see a live stage show. And then they turn the lights out because you have to turn out. They want to get a whole new, you couldn't sit through for a whole nother show, you know. And once a week, they had what in effect was an amateur hour, all right? So, you know, I was become very good. I was a very good classical clarinetist and was moving pretty good to learn a little jazz. So I'm on this amateur hour competition, and there's a white guy there, an Italian guy from Philadelphia. He was unbelievable on the clarinet. I mean, he was just unbelievable. About a year and a half older than me. His name was Buddy DeFranco. Okay. I mean, when I heard him play, I said, that's it. I mean, you know, he was good. Now, Buddy DeFranco and I became friends thereafter. He was one of the great, he may be still living, he's one of the great clarinetists of our time. All right, but he was great. So, now, during that period of time, I went to Juilliard School of Music twice during those summers to be trained as a classical clarinetist. There's a place at that time in New York was called Manny's Music Shop on 48th Street. 48th or 46th, I think it was 48th Street. But Manny's had a tradition. I think it was on Wednesday or Thursday, it may have been Thursday, late afternoon. They had a tradition of having musicians. It was a music store. It sold musical instruments principally at that time. The instruments were trumpets, saxophone, clarinets, trombones, and so forth. It wasn't like, they had guitars, but it wasn't like flooded with guitars. The dominant things were the reeds, the trumpets, the trombones, the clarinets, and saxophones. And I used to go and have my clarinet service there, you know, when I was there. And I got to know Manny, the owner. Took to me like just something, he just liked me as a young, you know, Negro clarinetist. You know, I think he also liked the fact that I was a classical clarinetist trained, and as he was, and I learned a little bit jazz. And he says, well, one day, he says, Bird, Charlie Parker's here. He's playing upstairs. And I told Bird about you. I said, yeah, what? What'd you tell him? I said, you're very talented and so forth. He's there upstairs playing now. Why don't you go up? I said, no. I said, yeah, I'd like to go up, so forth, you know? And so my clarinet was being fixed and so forth and so forth. So I go up and I'm listening and I'm very shy. And then Manny comes up, having done what he had done to my clarinet. He had put it together in the box and so forth and so forth. And so Bird says to me, Yeah, he told me. He says, you got your axe? And I said, yeah. He says, well, just sit. And I said, no, I can't. No, I can't do that. No. You put that thing together, boy. Put that thing together. And I'm shaking. I'm shaking like this, hands are shaking. And he's playing and so forth. He says, well, what's your favorite? And I just said, well, I can't. I said, Mr. Parker, don't call me Parker, call me Bird, I said, you just play along and I'll just sit and so forth. And then as I got into it, I said, well, do you know Way Back Home in Indiana? He said, yeah, I know, Way Back Home in Indiana, okay, and so forth. So, and he played Way Back Home and then Sunny Side of the Street and so forth. And I was sitting there and sort of, uncomfortably getting accustomed. And then when he switched and played Way Back Home in Indiana, which was faster tempo than Sunny Side of the Street, they're playing and playing, and I'm playing along with them. And he's looking at me, and he goes to me like that. And I said, "Oh my God!" Frozen there. The best I could do was improvise. Okay. The only thing is this is like an altar boy being an altar boy for the Pope.
Right.
I mean, you don't do that. But it gave. Hey, I did what I had to do. And then of course, like any comforting, caring elder, he said, "You're on your way, boy. You're on your way. You're on your way. You're on your way." I mean, it was encouraging me. The man was an unbelievable genius. Mm-hmm. We could have an interview just about Charlie Parker, but I want to say this about Charlie Parker. Those people who may not be musicians who will see this, you have to understand what Charlie Parker could do is that there would be a melodic line, and Charlie Parker had the capacity of improvising within the melodic line. He would improvise so that you could hear the line, but the improvisation would be so extraordinary. The classic example is April in Paris. Okay, you listen to that's what he did. I mean, brilliant. So that had a profound effect on me. But when I was in college, I had to make a decision. I could practice a little. I was under great pressure to do well. I played sports because it was in my system. But the most profound event that occurred in my life occurred when I was in college, which shaped me to be very much who I am today. And that event was this. It was the beginning of my junior year. It was in January. I was taking midterm examinations. And while I'm taking midterm examinations, the proctor comes in and says, "Are you Clarence Jones?" And I said, "Yes, I am." He said, "Well, there is an emergency call for you. You need to go to the dean's office." Now, ironically, I was taking this midterm examination on my birthday, January 8th, 1952. I go to the dean's office, and I said, "Mr. Jones, we got a call from a hospital in Camden, New Jersey. It's Cooper's Hospital. I may not, Cooper's something hospital." And I said, "Yes. Apparently, we don't know the details, but your mother's in the hospital. You need to call this number immediately." So, I'm trying to decide. So I call the hospital. Essentially, my father was so broken up, it was very difficult to communicate. So a doctor got on the phone and said, Your mother, we just operated on your mother. And we had to ask your father's consent. They had to take her bowel tract out to do a colostomy in a bag because she has cancer in her rectum and abdominal rectal cancer, and she probably has about 3 or 4 months to live. I mean, I go back and I'd say to the proctor, I said, I want to try to see if I can spend 15 minutes to try to finish where I am in the exam. So I finished, handed in my paper. And I went, got on a bus to go down to the hospital. And it was just, all this was a shock to me. My father was just in inconsolable grief. So we bring my mother home from the hospital. And I talk to the doctor, and I'm talking to my mother. And she is very upset that I am there. That she was started to cry. Why are you here? You should be in school. I said, well, Mama, I heard and so forth. She says, no, Mama's going to be all right. You got to go back to school. So, I talked to the doctor, and he says, well, Mr. Jones, this is what it is, I went in to see the dean of the college, and my attitude was, I can always get an education. This is my mother, So I wanted to take a leave of absence. I wanted to drop out, take a leave of absence. He says, no, I don't think you need to do that, Clarence. Why don't we work out something where you just stay, and we'll work out something with your classes, you try to keep up. And I had some friends, and so what I did was that I stayed in school, but I set up, I put a desk at the foot of my mother's bed in her bedroom, and that's where I did all my homework. And I had to leave periodically to go back to New York. I also had to leave to keep some credibility with her because she refused to believe that in fact I had permission to study. She just refused to believe it, and she would cry, Mama, I want you to have an education. Education, okay? May 4th, 1952, she dies. She's buried on May 8th. When she was 160 pounds, about tall, 5'10", 155, 60 pounds. When she died, she was about 99 pounds, less than 99 pounds. They took her body out from the mattress and took her to the undertaker place. And when they removed her body and they were removing the bed things, I saw that there was a letter under the mattress that she had written to me. All during the time she was sick, she would carry on this charade of Mama's going to get better, Mama's going to get, we're going to get better, it's going to be, not going to be, it's different. I'm going to have to get adjusted to doing things, but Mama's going to get better, we're going to get better. She was losing more weight anyway. So she leaves this letter to me. And the essence of the letter is that she's apologizing to me. She's asking my forgiveness for leaving me. She's asking my forgiveness. And she's talking about how proud I have made her feel. That no mother, she says, could ask for a son that could bring her greater joy. And then my favorite, she was a cook, one of the best cooks in the world, and I was a dessert, hound, so to speak, and so she knew that the things that she homemade for me were crullers and a dessert called Floating Island. And she says, Mama's sorry she can't be here to make crullers and Floating Island, but I wrote the recipe down for you. And I'm sorry to leave you, but I know that someday you're going to be a great man. I know you're going to be a great man, and always try to be good and always try to make me proud, because I know I am so proud of you, and someday you're going to be a great man. I'm sorry I have to leave you. Please forgive me. Okay? Well, let me tell you something. I was an only child. I had no brothers and sisters. Spent a limited amount of time with my parents. Okay. But as I began going forward in my life and I measured things in terms of how difficult they were or how painful they were, it became very clear that my internal gyroscope was founded on the following. I had been to the apex and the mountaintop of pain. I couldn't conceive of anything happening in my life thereafter. I couldn't conceive of anything thereafter having a more profound effect of loss and anguish than the loss of my mother. So that when I would study and read the political history of China, and I would see that Zhou Enlai, one of the great Chinese political leaders, says the strongest steel is tempered by the hottest fire. I knew what he was saying. It also conditioned me to have the dialectic of compassion and strength. Okay?
Pause for this. Okay, we're back.
So that, for example, the Korean War broke out on June 25th, 1950. I was a student. As a student, fully enrolled student, I was entitled to a student deferment, and I did a student deferment. Because in the aftermath of my mother's death, in 52, I was scheduled to graduate in 53, because in order to maintain your exemption, your student deferment, you either had to graduate or you had to be full-time in school, and if you were nearing graduation, you had to have made an application to a graduate school, okay? And if you didn't have either of those things, you were not entitled to be exempt from the draft. So my draft board snatched me because I was in the space. I was drafted on August 12th, 1953. Okay? I was angry. I had also become politicized in college. I had also met in New York through my uncle an extraordinary man who I didn't even know who he was. I saw and went to see him in a Broadway play, but then I found out he was an actor. It was Paul Robeson, right? Went to see him in Othello or on Whitman Avenue or something. I went to see him in something with Uta Hagen on Broadway. And my uncle had become friends with him. And when I was in Columbia, I had two instances with Paul Robeson. One, I'd been active politically in college. This is before my mother died. My mother died in 1952, but that whole area between 1949 and 1952 had been active and so forth. And I loved football in addition to all the other things. Okay? But if you love football, you either played football in Bakersfield as a part of the Columbia team, or if you went to a football game. And I was not varsity, but I was in line to be on the varsity team, and so I would go to every football team every Saturday. I'd be up at Bakersfield, at Columbia, New York, and my classmates who were more politically inclined would say, "Well, when we have to hand out leaflets, you never hand out any leaflets. You're never there. You're never there. You're either committed or you're not committed." So I told Paul Robeson this story once. I'm socially with my uncle at a party, and I told him that story. He was tall and big, and he says, you go back and you tell your white liberal progressive friends, I have lots of white progressive friends, but you go back and tell your white progressive friends who are students that one touchdown on a Saturday afternoon by you, a Negro, in Bakersfield with that stadium filled with almost 50,000 people, one touchdown have greater impact on getting white people to understand the equality of Negroes than anything they could ever write in those leaflets. As Paul Robeson said. Okay, never will forget that. The other influence on me is that he at this time was being summoned before the House Un-American Activities Committee. Okay, and I watched him on television. So let me just. You go back and look at the archives. I would suggest you go back and look at Paul Robeson appearing before the House Internal Security Committee, the House Un-American Committee, but it was chaired by Senator Eastland from Mississippi. And when Paul Robeson was being asked to be sworn in as a witness by the chairman, he stands up, 6'4", 6 foot, he says, he points his finger at him. You, Mr. Eastland, you are unconstitutionally seated in that chair. You don't have the authority, the constitutionality or authority to ask me any questions whatsoever because you were illegally sitting in this Congress. You were illegally because of the mass exclusion of my people in voting. You have no authority whatsoever to ask me any question. Meanwhile, I say, shut the witness, and that's the witness. I said, wow. I said, that was a bad dude. Okay, it influenced me, okay? So my mother dies, influenced Paul Robeson, my anger, not getting exempted. So when I report the night before the induction, by the way, I had some left wing. I'm not going to say they were communists because I don't know that they were communists. There was the young friends of mine, but they were members of the Labor Youth League, which was supposed to have been a communist affiliated organization. But they were left. But they were just great friends of mine.
We're back.
I had a,
If I could interrupt just for a second, when you were talking about your friends that are leaf living, is this the same group or is this the same kind of politics that you're?
oh, no, these were, these were different. They were friends, an extended group. They weren't necessarily, the Paul Robeson comments were meant to my friends who, yes, as a matter of fact, they were the same. They were substantially the same, okay? But I had become friends with, and one woman by the name of Judy Chiefman. Judy, I don't know whether you're alive, whether you ever hear this or see this, but I had such admiration for her and her family. Treated me like like I was just, part of their family, great warmth. And I remember Judy Chiefman. I mean, that was where she was as a young woman at that time. I don't know where it is today. But at that time, she says, if you don't want to go, if you don't want to report, maybe you should think about it. If you want to go to Canada, or if you don't want to go to Canada, I think you should go to Eastern Europe, Czechoslovakia, and so forth like that. And I said, no. And then she said, well, she said, don't get the wrong idea. Now, he says, my parents like you and I like you. And I really care about you. So all I'm simply saying, if you wanted to go and hesitate, I'd go with you if I would make it easy for you. And I'd find something to do. And I said, what are you talking about? She says, yeah, I would do that. Because I know you're hurting. I know you don't want to go. And I said, no, Judy, I can't do that. But I seriously thought about it. But as a result of the anger of being inducted when I didn't think I should have been inducted, in my draft board in Mount Holly, New Jersey, I signed from Richard Valeriani, who went to Burlington High School in Burlington, New Jersey. There were very few college students, and I still to this day believe that this prejudiced Mount Holly draft board saying, well, we'll send this Negro, we'll draft him. Who does he think he is? I think if I think I had been white, I don't think I'd have been drafted. I think I'd have said, oh, he's enrolled at Columbia College, and yes, he had a problem with this. I don't think they'd have drafted me. His mother died. No, they didn't care. So I was bitter. So the night before I was to report for induction, I sat down and wrote a handwritten note as to why I was reporting for induction, but why I was not going to serve in the Army. And in the course of the note, I said, in effect, I'm willing to go and serve and give my life for my country as a member of the United States Army when my country treats me as a first-class citizen. I'm not willing to put my life on the line in a war that I have lots of questions about, the Korean War, I'm not willing to do that. And so therefore, I'm reporting for induction, and I cited the first, I wasn't a lawyer, I didn't know anything. I was educated. I cited the first, the fifth, the 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution as the reason I was not, okay? So I'm in Whitehall Street in New York. I report for duty, August 13th, early in the morning. Now, if you've seen some of these military pictures, when you report to duty, the first thing the non-commissioned officer says, and it was a Negro non-commissioned officer, he says, all right, sissies, okay? You raise your hand, you're being inducted to the Army. Well, I didn't raise my hand, because I figured if I didn't consent to this, they couldn't. So I didn't raise my hand. So I'm listening to all this ramp about, your ass is grass now. You're in the Army. You belong to us. And then Sergeant, he says, well, what's with you? What's with you, soldier? And I said, there's nothing. I said, I'm here, I'm reporting. what are you, some kind of kook or conscientious objector? And I said, no. And then I gave him a statement to read. And he read it. He said, what are you, some kind of commie? I said, no. He said, well, get out of line. So he puts me out of line. And then a captain, a white captain officer comes over and says, what's the problem? Private Jones, what's the problem, Mr. Jones, he said. I said, well, I realize I'm here because I want to show up. But I don't, these are my reasons why I don't want to serve, sir. I think I'm being unfairly treated and I don't want to serve. He read it. And that's when he says, oh. He said, well, you better come over here. And they had some kind of conference for about 2 hours. Whatever they decided, whatever they decided, you go, they were going to put me on the bus to Fort Dix. Okay? So I go to Fort Dix. Okay? And somebody at Fort Dix had been alerted that I was on the bus and coming. All right? Now in the Fort Dix, that's when it gets serious. Okay? Because that's when they want you to sign up for your insurance. You sign if you're going to get paid. They issue your clothes. You issue some. And so they kept saying to me, if you don't sign this, you're not going to get any money. I said, I don't care. I'm not signing anything. What? Well, if you can't sign, you're not going to have any insurance. You're not going to get any paycheck. You're not going to get anything. I said, I don't care. I'm not signing anything. So they issue me standard things, and they process me to go for basic training. But no, stop there. Before they process me, I take examinations, okay, placement examination. So about 3 or 4 days after I take the placement examination, I find that they're putting me in a group that's scheduled to go to someplace in Maryland because we're going to be part of some special forces team. It's a special forces intelligence team. So I said, well, I think there must be some mistake, okay? So I remember going to one of these two orientation things, and I'm listening, and they're talking about how we're going to be trained as go into this special unit. Some of us may go to California to the Army Language School to learn Russian or Polish, principally that. I'm thinking to myself, and then I put it all together that because I talked to some of the other soldiers who were all gung-ho about this. They're going to send you to Fort Jackson, to paratrooper school, and so forth. The bottom line is that they were being trained to be special ops who would jump at night behind enemy lines in the Soviet Union, in Poland and Czechoslovakia. So I'm laughing when I find out. I said, now, this is after they go to the Army Language School. So I said, now let's assume that I go through all this and I'm fluent in Russian. How am I going to explain this black face of mine as I show up in the Russian countryside, the Polish countryside? I said, this is crazy. It's crazy, all right? I mean, that's how insane the military was at the point. But anyway, so I'm in the whole of it. And I was bitter, angry over the death of my mother, and really, I really began to, I was influenced by Paul Robeson, and I figured and I also was trying to find a way of getting out of not doing it.
I just wanted to ask, this is a good time, I think, to ask, what other influences beyond Robeson? I mean, were there people that you were reading? Looking back, this is a very direct. What do you think inspired that?
I think my friends, I had become friends with a lot of New York student leftists who had become, in one case, a couple of cases, had become very dear friends of mine. In one case I can think of, there's a fellow by the name of Robert Baron Nemeroff. Robert Nemeroff was getting a master's degree in English from NYU. He didn't go to Columbia, he went to NYU. And we became friendly through my political activities in New York. And Robert's family owned a restaurant, an Israeli restaurant, on 46th Street in Manhattan called the Habibi. And it was a nightclub, restaurant. And Robert introduced me to his parents, particularly his mother. And when his mother found out that I was at Columbia, that I was working on tables, and I was skinny, and she says, well, speaking in Yiddish, she spoke very little English. And so Bobby would be talking to her in Yiddish and talking to me in English, which, by the way, as a result of that relationship, 3 or 4 or 5 years of knowing her, I was fairly capable in conversational Yiddish, particularly when it came to food. You know, I used to, people would say, well, how do you know anything about knedlach? I said, I know knedlach and matzo ball. I know it because I used to have it all the time, you know. And anyway, they had this nightclub, and she would have me come down and eat outside the kitchen, right to the entrance to the kitchen to the nightclub where they would the restaurant part. I would come anytime and eat, and I wouldn't do it except maybe on the weekends. Weekends I'd come there, weekends before. But anyway, I became very, very close to Robert Nemeroff. He and I became friends. And he ended up marrying Lorraine Hansberry, the playwright, who also became a friend of mine when I was in school. Lorraine Hansberry was an African-American playwright from Chicago, okay, became good friends of mine. She married Robert Nemeroff. And the other good friend of mine were the DeLugoffs brothers. Art DeLugoff was an entrepreneur and owned the Village Gate nightclub, and his brother Bert owned the nightclub with him, except Bert went to medical school at Johns Hopkins. So while Art was running the nightclub, Bert was in medical school at Johns Hopkins. But those were my good friends. And then I go through the military experience. I become friendly. But first of all, there are a couple of people in the military that when they found out, I'm in the military in 1953. That's 55, okay? The military only be segregated beginning in 1950, okay? Executive order late 1949 by Harry Truman. So only had an integrated army for 3 years, all right? So I was in Company D, 47th Regiment in Fort Dix. And I just remember it being about, I don't know, maybe it was 40% black, maybe it was about 40% black or more. Substantial 40% black. My company commander was from Mississippi, captain. The non-commissioned officers were virtually all Negro at that time. So I'm in the military, and I become very, very close. I developed some close friends. One, when word spreads that I'm going to be here indefinitely, or more specifically, I am not going to be shipped overseas after basic training, guys coming up to me and said, well, tell me how you did this. Because they wanted to revoke. They wanted to be in a holdover status. They didn't want to be shipped out. And if you didn't, and the only way you could get a discharge in the Army is a dishonorable discharge, a Section 8 being crazy, or an undesirable. So all of them wanted to opt to be a Section 8. Crazy. I had a good friend of mine, he says, oh, I'm a communist. I said, well, his name was Fields. I said, I'm not a communist. Well, no, but they won't take it. I'm going to go back and told them, I mean, I didn't even look at that thing. I signed that loyalty oath. I didn't sign the loyalty oath. I didn't make that clear to you. When I handed my statement, I also, as part of the various series of papers you sign, consenting to being in the Army, there's a whole lot of papers, but attached to those papers was a loyalty oath for 400 organizations that the then Attorney General McGrath or Herbert Brownell determined was on either communist or communist-funded organizations, including a lot of, organizations I knew were not communist. The Young Progressives of America, they were not a communist organization, but they were there. And so I didn't sign it. So word spread that I had not signed it. And so some of the soldiers were saying, we don't know whether, what you are or not. And then the other word spread, it's like being in the military is a little bit like prison, Word spread that somebody said to be careful because the word said to somebody, I needed to be taken into a shower and taught a lesson in loyalty, So you better watch yourself, And but when I developed a very good friendship with a guy who was a big guy, like a football player, we became very close friends. He's somewhat protective of me, too. His last name was Hinton. Big guy. Very good friends. Fast forward. I'm sitting in a bar somewhere in Harlem on leave, talking to Clinton. We're drinking, trying to see what girls we're going to get, so forth. And he starts to cry. So I figured, it's too much liquor. He started to cry. They had a lot to drink, a lot of beers, and started crying. And then he told me, he said, I had treated him like a brother. I had taken him to my family, and he is so sorry. I said, what are you sorry about? He says, my main job here in your platoon is to report about you. I said, what do you mean report about me? He said, I have to write reports about you. I said, what kind of reports? Well, whether you've ever said anything against the United States, whether you're a communist. And I said, well, the only thing he likes is sports and girls. Sports and women, that's all he talks about. Sports girls and women and music. That's all he talks about. And you've introduced me to some of your good friends and so forth. And he had a lot to drink. And he just unburdened it. He said, I can't. I said, well. So that was over a weekend, right? We go back to camp report to formation on Monday. Monday afternoon and Monday evening, I'm looking for Hinton. He's gone. I never saw him again. Never saw him again. I'm in the Army for 21 months.
And where did you serve again?
At Fort Dix.
At Fort Dix.
At Fort Dix for 24 months.
Yeah. So what were you doing? What was your?
I was trained into telecommunications, Army signal communications, teaching me the intricacies of how to operate signal equipment on the field and so forth, map reading, so forth. I went through the whole basic training. I went through everything that you go, bivouac, marches with 26 pounds. I did the whole thing, so forth. But 21 months, I'm in my barracks one morning, getting ready to go to what I normally do. And an MP comes in, 2 MPs come in. And one MP says, are you Private Jones? I said, yes. They hand me this paper. And they hand me this paper, and in a sense, it's like a summons and complaint. It's it's a notice that they're bringing me up for court-martialing me as a security risk. with this whole series of allegations. One allegation being that I had refused to sign the loyalty oath. The other allegation being that since 1938 up until the present, I'm a member of the Communist Party. Well, of course, I was only 7 years old in 1938. Okay. The other was that I had lived, which was true, after my mother died, and in my last year in college, and I had lived in a housing development that was run by the IL, International Labor one of the labor unions that was deemed to be a Communist Front labor union. That I lived there. That's where I lived. Okay? And the other was that I had maintained a very close friend, which was true, with a doctor who was still today, he's retired, a doctor at Stanford University, who at the time had been a vice president of the International Union of Students. Been a member of the Communist Party since I was 8, didn't sign a loyalty oath, lived in the Allerton houses in the Bronx, and that was it. And so I'm assigned a council, defense council, and they have this field board of inquiry at Fort Dix. And my commanding officer is called, and so I'm the principal evidence they put in are the allegations, and we rebut the allegations. They said, well, not a member of the Communist Party. Yes, it is true. He did live there. Yes, it is true. He knows so and so. Yes, it is true. He didn't sign the loyalty oath, and even my adjutant general lawyer said, well, these are all your. He put my commanding officer on the stand. They said to testify to whether I was a good soldier or not. Bottom line, if you could have Clarence Jones in your company, he said he was the #1 soldier. I'd be honored to have him serve at any time. Never heard him, nothing but glowing remarks. Plus, I had been chosen as Soldier of the Month. And Soldier of the Month, let me tell you, you become Soldier of the Month. You become Soldier of the Month for the 47th Regiment, something battalion. The way Soldier of the Month is that you stand before your footlocker, and your neatest clothes, and your footlocker is in perfect shape, and your bed is made so they put a quarter or something in it, so forth. Your shoes are shined. And then you're asked to disassemble your M1 rifle, okay, and reassemble it, blindfolded, okay? I did that and got a perfect score. And so as a result of that, I was given the Good Conduct Medal. So I was chosen as Soldier of the Month, given a Good Conduct Medal and a special 3-day leave, and all this is in the record when I'm being court-martialed. The verdict comes down the very next day. I've been found be undesirable, a national security risk to the United States government and to the United States military. At which point, 2 MPs took me back to my barracks. They supervised me packing up all of my things, put me in a duffel bag, put me in a Jeep with a one-way ticket to Port Authority, and they waited until the bus. They put me on. They escorted me to the exits, the gate of Fort Dix under armed guard, and put me on the bus under armed guard. I was given an undesirable discharge on August 13th, 1955. I was inducted. I think it was August 14th. I think I was inducted on August 13th, but I was returned on August 14th. So as I'm riding in on the bus, I'm smoldering. And I'm thinking, they don't know what they got their hands. So I go and I'm staying with my uncle. I discussed it with my uncle. And my uncle says, "Well, I think you ought to go see the American Civil Liberties Union." So I go down and see the American Civil Liberties Union. I tell them my story, and they have me meet with a lawyer by the name of Stanley Faulkner. God rest his soul. Stanley Faulkner. We filed an appeal. It was the first time I went into the Pentagon. The Pentagon has something called the Army Discharge Review Board. The Army Discharge Review Board, the Armed Services Discharge Review Board, the Armed Services Discharge Review Board. It consists of, like the Supreme Court, all of the uniformed services are sitting in bunk. The Navy, the Marines, the Coast Guard, the Air Force are all sitting there, military officers. And it's like the Court of Appeals. Excuse me, I need to go to the men's room quickly. Take a break.
Okay.
So I said, so I went to Stanley Faulkner, and it's like an appeal. And he subpoenaed, and my military my commander and everything was there. To make a long story short, as a result of the appeal, they awarded me a general discharge. They moved up my discharge one notch. Stanley Faulkner says, "No, that's not satisfactory. He's entitled to an honorable discharge," and I wasn't thinking about what I was going to do, but I decided I wanted to go to law school at that time, and I went to Columbia College. And I was considering about I went up to talk to the Columbia Law School, and I told them the problem I had. They didn't even get to the question of whether grades and applications and so forth. They discouraged me because they said that, while you have this problem, I think you ought to get this problem solved before you considering entering law school. You don't know. You're not going to be able to be a lawyer if you have this thing hanging over your head. Meanwhile, I had become friendly with Judge Hubert Delaney and some other lawyers, and they suggested I go and talk to Boston University Law School. So I talked to Boston University Law School, and I told them the issue, and they said, "Well, listen, if you want a legal education, we'll give you a legal education. What you decide whether you're going to ever practice, but we'll admit you. We'll get your papers." The mere fact that you have currently an undesirable discharge has been general, and you don't know how it's going to go on appeal, that's not going to stop you, so you're welcome to come. But the key thing, of course, I needed an honorable discharge, because as an honorable discharge, I'd qualified for the Korean GI Bill. Okay? So Stanley Faulkner, we sued. He brought a writ of mandamus, I believe. A writ of mandamus, for those people who are not familiar, it's an administrative proceeding that's brought against an officer of a government agency to compel that person to perform the duties that he is or she is required to do according to the statute. So Stanley Faulkner's thesis was that the Secretary of the Army, he had a he was compelled by the nature of the authority to issue me an honorable discharge. Okay? I'm at Boston University Law School. I'm registering, knowing full well that maybe I'll win the case and maybe I won't win the case, but Boston, they're already working out a situation where if I could come up with just a modest little amount for the down payment, they'll carry me and so forth, and they're working out the best arrangement they could. I haven't completed registering in law school. I hadn't gotten my books when I got this urgent message to call Stanley Faulkner. So I called Stanley Faulkner, and they said, "We won. You've just been issued an honorable discharge. And this is what you must tell me. You must, I'm going to get in touch with the Veterans Administration officer in Boston and tell them that we're going to have your copy of your order, so forth, so that you can get your benefits. That's what happened, is that the Veterans Administration was notified I had a honorable discharge. The VA then notified the bursar at Boston University, and they then activated me as being going to school and getting my tuition on the Korean GI Bill. And lo and behold, I got a check for, I don't know, several $1,000s, maybe about 12,000, or maybe, I don't know, 13,000 or something, for all the back pay. All the back pay, which I didn't get in the military. I didn't get any paycheck while I was in that whole time.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So that, but I introduced this by talking about the death of my mother, okay? Because her death made me fearless. I didn't have any brothers and sisters. I didn't have any brothers or sisters to comfort me, okay? It became very clear to me that we are all, to a large extent, the challenge is to what extent can you control your own destiny and not have it be determined by a third party? And what are you prepared to put at risk? What are you prepared? Now, my attitude, I lost my mother. I didn't feel I could lose anything. I didn't feel like I could lose anything. I wasn't afraid of anything. I was angry. And during the period, I go to the New York Public Library the day after I get into New York. And I'm staying at my uncle's place, and he's telling me to go down. I go to the New York Public Library because I was trying to decide what I'm going to do and go into the library, read papers, and so forth. And I hear somebody call my name. I figured, who the hell knows it call my name? Clarence Jones, is that you? Clarence Jones? I turned around, and there's a woman. And I hadn't seen this woman in like 5 years, maybe. Her name was Ann Norton. Ann Norton had gone to Sarah Lawrence. And when I was at Columbia, occasionally a group of guys from Columbia would go up and party at Sarah Lawrence. And Sarah Lawrence, at that time, the women lived in houses, different houses. So it was a big thing to be able to go on a Saturday night to go to Sarah Lawrence, because that's where you had all these girls. Well, Ann Norton was, and they had parties, and I knew her. Okay. She was white, and I knew she would, you know, she was one of those active, progressive, very nice people. And last thing I heard, she was living in Chicago, working for Spiegels and so forth. No, she's in New York now, working for the American National Theater Company. What's that? What's, the American National Theater Company? What are you doing? Well, and so forth and talking. And I told her the story about what happened to me in the Army. She says, oh my God, well, where are you staying? I'm staying with my uncle. And she says, she says, well, what are you doing tomorrow? I said, I don't know what I'm doing. Oh, I'm doing tomorrow. She says, well, the American National Amphitheater is having our annual thing on Broadway. Would you like to come? You've been in the Army. Would you like to come? Being good for you. I said, sure. So I go to the American National Theater Company's production of Damn Yankees. Okay? Gwen Verdon. Okay? It was the second Broadway play I'd ever seen. The first had been with my uncle when I had seen Paul Robeson maybe it was on Whitman, something with Uta Hagen. That was the second time, okay? But this time, I mean, I had good seats there with Paul Robeson, with Uta Hagen. But this time I'm with Anta, I get the very great seats. And I didn't have a tuxedo. My uncle and I are about the same size. So I had to go and borrow his dark blue suit. And I wore a bow tie, a black bow tie, and a white shirt and a dark blue suit, and a pair of his dark shoes, black shoes. I didn't have any clothes. That's how I went to Anta, wearing my uncle's clothes. We went to Sardi's. She began with a friend of hers. This was all during the appeal process. And during the appeal process, you had to type up. You had to provide copies of the transcripts. It was for a lot of photocopying and so forth. So Anne and a woman friend of hers, they spent hours typing up my appeal transcript, And during that whole process, we became romantically involved, and then I married her. And that was a major turning point in my life. And so my father had remarried. I married one of my mother's best friends, whom I liked, so forth. And so I let my father and my new stepmother know I was going to get married. And I had become friendly with a couple, Charles White and Fran Barrett White. Charles White was an artist, very distinguished artist at UCLA at one point. Before Romy Bearden, one of the great artists. He was the best man at my wedding to Anne, and Fran Barrett was, I guess, the maid of honor to Anne. We became very good friends, and my in-laws, my wife's parents, were reconciled. They were not unfriendly. They were sort of matter of fact, protocol friendly, but not hostile in any way. They were at the wedding. We had a reception at the Belmont Hotel, wedding cake and all of that. When Anne and I were dating, I learned, I knew it in general, but I didn't know the details. We got closer to it. I learned that, yes, her parents had founded the W.W. Norton Publishing Company. Her name was Anne Norton, and Norton was because Walter Norton founded the W.W. Norton Publishing Company with her mother. And so she came from a publishing business. And that her father had died. Her father had died when she was 18 and 19. Her mother remarries. Her mother remarries a banker, an international banker from Holland. His name is Daniel H. Craner de Jong, Crenea, small d-e, capital I-O-N-G-H. He was the head of the banking industry in the Netherlands, the number one banker in the Netherlands. He was also one of the early, if not one of the first, treasurers of the World Bank. But affecting my relationship was not those, was that his very best friend in the world, whom he vacationed with, and when he married Anne's mother, whom they vacationed with, in Johannesburg, South Africa, was Heinrich Verwoerd. the architect of apartheid. My stepfather-in-law is the banker for not only the Netherlands, but is the banker for Heinrich Verwoerd and that whole Nationalist Party. Okay. Now, he treated me with protocol warmth and courtesy. It was something almost like out of Downton Abbey. I mean, it was like he treated me as a gentleman. There was no hostility toward me. It wasn't a question whether he approved or disapproved. He accepted it as a fact. I was married to his wife's daughter, and he treated me with great friendship initially, and then it eventually became affection and respect. And we had a kind of annual ritual. He was a member of the Netherlands Club in somewhere near Rockefeller Center, and every holiday he would take me to lunch at his Netherlands Club where other international bankers would be, and he would proudly introduce me as his son-in-law. And the breakthrough in the relationship with my in-laws came when my wife's mother, who was a classical chamber music violist, when her daughter had told me that I played the clarinet, suggested that I bring up my clarinet one weekend, not knowing how I could play. And she heard me play, warm up. The best thing I can tell you is that it blew her away, because I sat down when she was just watching this thing. I said, well, why don't I play for you the Mozart Clarinet Concerto in A for you to listen to? You just sit over there and I'll play. She was stunned. The next week, this is in Wilton, Connecticut. The next week, she arranges for there to be a chamber music grouping in which her son-in-law is going to be the clarinetist, in which we played Brahms, Mozart, but things for clarinet and strings and cello and flute, primarily written by Brahms and Mozart, Beethoven writing some things. And then, of course, I would perform solo pieces like Flight of the Bumblebee. That single act made my mother-in-law go out of her way to tell other people about how she wanted them to meet me and how he's busy, but we want him to come up here every weekend because you have to see him and so forth and so on. And I write in one of my books. When she heard me play the Mozart Clarinet Concerto, it was a whole. She heard me play this before we had any children, because normally children it would have before. No.
Now, had you and Anne talked about what life might be like for you as an interracial couple at that time, or did you have other examples of couples that you knew?
Well, Charlie White was a black artist married to a white woman, Fran Barrett. And I say this not in criticism, Anne went to the Brealey School, private girls' school. She went to Sarah Lawrence. When she was in high school, she was raised by a governess. Okay. In addition to having a home in Wilton, Her parents had a townhouse on Gramercy Park, and at that time, everybody who owned a townhouse had a key to the park. So I remember we lived. Their townhouse was 17 Gramercy Park, and Anne had a tremendous deep idealism, but also had a certain kind of patricianness, a certain kind of attitude that she was certain she was right. The classic example, this is after, we're living in Boston. My oldest daughter was a baby. We're shopping at a food place in the checkout. And Anne had to go back, and so Christine was in this little bassinet, and we left her right up on the counter, near the checkout counter. And I was standing there by, and the checkout counter, I must have turned, and somebody said, well, whose little baby is this? Not in a negative way. But my wife saw this, okay? And like a lioness, this is what I'm going to say. Her way of dealing with this, so she's white, fair-skinned, blonde hair, gray blue eyes, attractive, 5'10.5", was the way she looked at that white woman behind the counter. It was like that's what she could do. It was like she looked at this other white person like she was a piece of dirt. And how dare she question, how dare she even think about? I mean, that's the other side of Anne. Mm-hmm. She had this natural kind of instinct. She could become very precious. So my answer to your question is that she loved me. Answer to the question that I think that she felt that she didn't have to ask anybody's approval. Mm-hmm. She felt she had the resources and the stature. She felt she was raised in an environment where she was part of the upper class. Mm-hmm. Okay, she was part of the upper class. So she tended to look down on everybody else. Classic example. And I say this just as a classic example. Her best friend was a woman by the name of Fran Damon. Fran Damon was the daughter of the Dole pineapple people. They were very, very close friends. In fact, when I got ready to graduate from law school, Fran Damon tried to convince Anne that we should just move to Hawaii. And I said, I didn't know what I wanted to do, move to Hawaii. But she says, look, don't worry about it. My family will Clarence and you will build you a house, so forth, and we'll just so forth. And I didn't even appreciate who Fran Damon was until Anne began to tell me. And then I began to understand that aside from some king's trust, aside from the trust in Hawaii, that the Damons were the second largest landowners in Hawaii, and that was Anne's friends. The other thing was that Anne had lots of left-wing friends too, and I think she was. Objectively, I would have to say we were all living in a state of rebellion, but she more than I. I think, and I loved her. I think she was rebelling against the fact that she did not like her stepfather. Or to really put it very bluntly, she liked her stepfather, but she couldn't reconcile who he was and what he did. And one of the arguments we used to have, she thought that I was too nice to him. Or she would say, he's only being nice to you because he wants you to overlook. And I said, Ann, hold on. I said, he's your stepfather. I said, all I know, your mother and Don, they have their life. They're treating us. I'll say. So in other words, I wanted to diffuse it and so forth. It became very clear, however, that Don tended to be more friendly to me than he was to Ann. Okay? They had a separate kind of antagonism going on there. But anyway, you asked it to your question. Well, yeah, I mean, we accepted that as part of the reality. Sometimes that reality would be forced on us. For example, when we went to Boston and we were looking for a place to live and go to law school, one or two or three places, once they found out that we were an interracial couple, suddenly the apartment was not available or something else, so forth. So Ann was not dumb, smart. She says, well, this is one apartment that I really like and I think we should have. So what I'd like to do, let me go and see it. Let me go and look at it. And if I like it, you trust me, I'm going to come back. I'll show you the diagram, and then I'll go back. And if I like it, you'll have to trust me. We're going to sign. I'm going to take this apartment, and I'll tell them that, my husband is a student, a lawyer, and he'll come up and sign the lease later, okay? So this is because we had already had at least two, maybe three instances where we'd have an apartment fall through. So finally I go to this apartment at 857 Beacon Street. And there's an Irish superintendent, and he's a little astounded to see that I am the Mr. Jones, okay? That whom he has rented to his wife, okay? And he had this thick Irish brogue. And the first thing I said to him, I said, Mr. So-and-so, I said, that brogue you have is music to my ears. I haven't heard that since I was in boarding school with Irish nuns. He looked at me. He says, you were what? I says, yes, I was in boarding school. And I said, in fact, the one that I had the most love was a Sister Mary Patricia. And she said to me, she made me promise when I grow up, that I would one day go to visit Ireland. And she used to sing to me. She used to sing Danny Boy. And he listened to me. And he said, oh, really? He says, well, let me show you around the apartment. He started showing me around the apartment. And he asked me some questions. And I told him I had been an altar boy at the midnight mass and at Easter services. And I kept saying how much I owed to the Irish nuns. And that's why I was so, it was music to my ear to hear that. Well, he said, come on downstairs. I want to introduce you to my wife. He's the superintendent of the building now. So his wife isn't there. So we take him downstairs and he goes to the refrigerator. He opens up some beers. He says, we sit and talk, So we have a couple of beers and so forth. And as he's drinking, he's becoming more loose and so forth. He says, I think they're probably going to shit a brick. That's what he says. They're going to shit a brick when they find out that you're a Negro. But this is my building. I'm the superintendent of this building. And your wife has signed a lease, and I approve of you, and you got a good lease. Welcome to the building. So that's okay, that's all right. That couple became they were the superintendent. And the other thing they liked is that all the other tenants in the building, they didn't fraternize with him. But because he was so nice, my wife would frequently ask them, the superintendents of the building, to come and have dinner with us, come and do something. So this man just fell in love with me. And he fell in love with Ann. okay? And we used to talk a lot of baseball. We used to talk about Fenway Park was just a couple of blocks away from my apartment. And he developed a certain pride in me, okay? And they used to babysit for us, and he would say, you know, he said, we were at dinner, he said, you know, you're the only, I've never sat down and drank with, I never talked to any Negro before. I just never talked to him. I don't know why. He said, don't talk to him. I don't have anything against him. I just never talked to him, you know? I mean, this is the way he was. But that's the reason we got that apartment. And so we got that apartment because of those Irish nuns. Because I said, when he spoke in this brogan, it was very distant. I said, geez, I haven't heard that music to my ears, and that's so startled him to hear me say that. And so I said, here again, the Irish nuns were looking out for me. I mean, that's how I got. By the way, it was a magnificent apartment on the top floor of 857 Beacon Street. You see it was like the top floor apartment. And that's where I went to law school.
And then,
So, okay, well,
and I think just in the interest of time, you know,
Yeah.
move forward into your entertainment law career,
Okay.
and then your introduction to Dr. King.
Okay. Well, I did. When I was in law school, as I said, Fran Barrett and Charlie White. Fran Barrett was my wife's closest friend, aside from Fran Damon, who lived in Hawaii. They moved from Riverside. They moved from New York City to California. And when they moved to California, my wife began to long. Okay, she really missed them and said, we got to go out and visit them. And in my senior year in law school, I took a course in copyright law. And during that time, copyright law had an essay competition called the Nathan Birkin Memorial Copyright Competition, in which students taking copyright law would write on some esoteric topic. The country was divided into 4 quadrants, the Northeast quadrant and so forth. So in the Northeast quadrant was Harvard, Yale, Boston University, Dartmouth, University of Pennsylvania, Syracuse, all and so forth, okay? Because I was a musician, I wrote a paper called The Judicial Criteria Employed to Determine Musical Copyright Infringement. You know, I mean, I wrote the paper showing how the courts, I mean, I did it in written decision. The paper didn't win for the Northeast quadrant, but it got honorable mention. In other words, there was a winning paper in each quadrant, and then one paper was chosen from among the 4, but in each quadrant there was always a second one. So I got the honorable mention. So my professor was blown away. He says, you know, and since I was a little bit older, I'd gone to law school 3 years later than if I had just gone from college to law school. And so we became friendly, you know. We became friendly. It wasn't just professor and student. It was like Donald Clarence, you know, he was a professor. And one day we're having coffee, maybe drinks, I don't know. He says, you know, Clarence, he says, you really got a real knack for this. And he says, you know, in the entertainment business, he says, most Negroes are before the camera or on the footlights or on stage. And I'm not in any way trying to diminish that talent. He says, but that's not where the real power is. That's not where the decision. If you're interested in the entertainment business, it's behind. It's the people who make the decisions. It's the people who finance the distribution agreement and so forth. And you got a real knack for this. And I think you ought to consider going into entertainment law. I have a friend who's the general counsel of Review Productions, by the name of Leslie Charlo. And I'm going to suggest that you go out there and work. And so you go to California. And that's what I did. I went to California to go to work at as in the office of Leslie Charlo as just starting out. I had to take the California bar, which I started to study for, but I had to do, and in fact, the thing I remember is Sandy Dennis and Bobby Darin. They were two stars. They used to come sit on my desk in Review Production lot, and Bobby Darin had a very kind of openness. He says, now, Clarence, where did you come from? He says, they don't even have Negroes sweeping the stages. Where did you come from? You dropped from Mars? How did you get here? So will you go and talk to Les? Well, Les told me I should go and ask you. Leslie Charlo, So they were trying to befriend me, and Sandy would say, you gotta watch your back. Sandy Dennis would say, you gotta be above. She would say to me, you see all these cuties around here looking at you? You gotta be above. Watch your back. Okay. I'm there like 3-4 months. Somewhere between 1 and 6 months. Leslie Charlo dies of a heart attack. Okay. I come all the way out here to go. Okay. So he dies, and he's the power. He's the general counsel. He's the guy. He's Donald Shapiro's friend. Okay. So it's like my godfather's gone, And people around him also would wonder, well, why is this guy here anyway? So when Leslie Charlo was, and nobody complained about my work. They complained about it made very clear that it was very uncomfortable. So I left, and I was thinking about what I was going to do when I got a call in February 1960 from Judge Hubert Delaney. Much of what I'm going to tell you has been repeated. You've probably seen interviews, so not verbatim, but it's substantially the same subject matter. I tell people how I met Dr. King. It's in the book. If you read the book, you'll see how okay. He had been indicted by the state of Alabama for tax evasion, for perjury, lying on his income tax return. Judge Hubert Delaney, a Negro judge and lawyer, was the chief defense counsel along with 3 other lawyers. 2 of the lawyers were from Chicago, very elite tax attorneys. The other lawyer was a local lawyer by the name of Fred Gray, civil rights lawyer. He was a local person. But they needed a law clerk, a clerk who would go down and coordinate. So Judge Delaney says, Clarence, I know you, and we're defending this, and I'd love for you to come down and be our law clerk and help us with the defense. And I said, Judge, I'd love to do it, but I'm here in Altadena, California. I can't. There's no way I can do that. No, this is. Have you met him? I said, no. He says, well, this is a very special time, and I'd like you to. Anyway, he made a great, and it was very difficult. This is the man that recommended me to Boston University Law School. This is the person who was a judge, who's a senior. Oh, okay. I mean, it was very, very great power. But for me to say no to him, was not easy. Okay, but I said no. I couldn't. I said no for practical purposes. I couldn't go, and so my wife at that time was pregnant with our second child. It was comfortable going.
And you knew, obviously, Martin Luther King from the news.
No, I did not know. No, I had never met him before. I had vaguely heard of him. I tell everybody I was in law school from 1956 to 1959. I didn't know anything. I mean, I knew about the Montgomery bus boycott, but I was studying. I didn't have time to follow a little Negro preacher what he's doing. I mean, I was really not focused on that, So the judge was very disappointed in me. The next thing I know, that was on a Thursday night. On Friday morning, I get another call from the judge, and he says, Clarence, I did not know it at the time of our conversation, but Dr. King is on his way to California right now. He has a speaking engagement at the World Public Affairs Council. And I told on Saturday evening, and I told him, if he does nothing else, before he goes to the speaking engagement, and I think he's also going to preach out there, he says, I told him he has to find a way in meeting and talking to you. So I'm thinking to myself, I said, okay. So I mean, I listened, the judge, and I'm thinking to myself afterwards, why would the judge do that? He figures, well, anyway, maybe just Martin King is going to change my mind. So Friday night, doorbell rings. Martin King comes to my home in Altadena, California. He comes in and he says, he introduces himself and comes in with a fellow by the name of Bernard Lee. He comes in sits around the coffee table, and by the way, at that time in February 1960, under all classic criteria, he was a celebrity. He'd been on the cover of Look, Life, and Time magazine. Plus, he had been successful in the Montgomery bus boycott with Rosa Parks. Plus, in addition, the Supreme Court, 1957, had handed down a decision outlawing segregation in interstate bus transportation. He was riding high, this preacher from Montgomery, okay, in 1960. So when I told my wife that he was coming, you would have thought, in classic current terms, that an amalgamation of George Clooney, Denzel Washington, Matt Damon, Matthew McConaughey, Michael Jackson, whoever. I mean, she was like, the greatest, so forth, okay? So she was very impressed. So he sits down, and he says, Mr. Jones, we have lots of white lawyers who help us in the movement, but what we need are young Negro lawyers. So I said, Dr. King, I hear you. I said, I told Judge Delaney I'd be willing to work on your case in any way, but I just can't go down. I just can't travel. And then I told him why, And he asked me some questions about myself, and I told him what I told you about how I was raised, my mother's death, and so forth. I'm shortening it, and he leaves. Now my wife turns to me, and with an unexpected attack dog syndrome, and she says, "What do you think you are doing that's so important that you cannot help this man that came all this distance to ask for your assistance?" I said, "Now hold on, Ann, that's not quite true. He had a speaking engagement. He did not come out to see me. All right? And besides, just because some Negro preacher got his hand caught in a cookie jar stealing, that's not my problem." Well, that's sort of like sent her over the top. That's Friday night. Saturday night, Saturday morning, I got another call. This time, the voice is saccharine sweet. "Mr. Jones, yes. My name is Dora McDonald. Mr. Jones, Dr. King enjoyed so much his visit with you and Mrs. Jones, but Mr. Jones, he forgot to invite you to be his guest at a church tomorrow in Baldwin Hills. He's going to be the guest preacher, and he would so like for you and Mrs. Jones to join him." So I told my wife what the message was. She says, "Well, you may not be going to Montgomery, but you're going to that church." So she didn't want to go. So I go to the church, and I had never heard Dr. King speak before. Never heard him, didn't pay any attention to him. I was 1/3 from the front of the pulpit, and he gets up, he says, "Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, the text of my sermon today is the role and responsibility of the Negro professional in aiding our less fortunate brothers and sisters struggling for freedom in the South." So I said, one smart dude. Then he begins to speak. And he begins to describe what he's doing in much more detail and texture. I had never heard or seen him speak before. More accurately, I had never heard another human being walking on two legs on this earth speak that way before. It was mesmerizing. It was like, you could hear a pin drop, and it was, as he was so intense, and it was melodious. And then he pauses during the course of his sermon. And he says, for example, there's a young man sitting in this church today. My friends in New York, who are lawyers, for whom I have great respect. My friends in New York tell me that this young man's brain has been touched by Jesus. They tell me that when this young man, a lawyer, does any legal research, he goes all the way back to the time of 1066. William the Conqueror and the Magna Carta. And then my friends in New York, for whom I have great respect, tell me that when he writes down what he finds in the law library, the words are so compelling they just jump off the page. So I'm thinking to myself, he wouldn't even, he's not looking at me, and I can't even, inconceivable he could be talking about me, because I'm thinking to myself, I'm a little bit of an opportunist. I'm saying, you know, when this church is over, I want to find out who that man is, since I need to network. You know, I'm not at Universal Pictures anymore. I need to network and find out, because this person is going to help me if he's that good, okay? And then he continues. He said, you know, but I had a chance to visit with this man in his home the other night in Altadena. And I said, oh, my Lord. He started talking about me, never looking at me. And then I used the example of Roberta Flack has a song, Killing Me Softly with Your Songs. Now, what I told Dr. King about myself was not state secrets or private, but I didn't expect him to tell 1,500 or 2,000 people. You know, so I was a little embarrassed by that. And then he took poetic license. There's the author, poet Langston Hughes, has a poem called Mother to Son. And the lyrics in that poem talk about a washerwoman and a domestic. She's washing the stairs and she pauses on the landing. She says, I'm doing this for you, son. Don't you give up. Life ain't been no crystal stair. Don't you give up. Dr. King changes the lyrics and puts my mother as the actor in the poem instead of the washerwoman, at which point I began to cry, because I get bestirred by, you know, I knew that she had begun the greatest pain I ever experienced in my life, and then I began to recognize how much she loved me, how much she had sacrificed, and she didn't see any of the things. She didn't see me graduate from college, didn't see me graduate from law school, didn't see me have any, didn't see her grandchildren, didn't see anything. So I was moved by that, you know. Sermon's over. Dr. King is a celebrity, so he's out signing autographs on the steps of the pulpit. As I walk over to him, he says, you know, I never mentioned your name, Mr. Jones. I never mentioned your name. He says, sometimes we preach, a Baptist preach, he says, I never mentioned your name. I just walked up to him, put my hand in his right hand, my right hand in his right hand. And I grabbed his shoulder like this, and I said, Dr. King, when do you want me to go to Montgomery, Alabama? That was a major turning point in my life.
And we're rolling.
Okay, today is April 16th, 2013.
Right, you got today's address correct.
Okay.
Yesterday you had it
right.
incorrect,
Yeah,
right,
I
right.
knew we were going to end up on a second day. So
Okay,
so
all right.
Today is April 16th, 2013. We're continuing with Dr. Clarence Jones here in Palo Alto.
Dr. Clarence B. Jones.
Clarence B. Jones
Thank
here
you.
in Palo Alto, California.
Right.
So thank you again for
Oh.
spending even more time with us.
No.
What we'd like to do, because time is limited,
Of the essence, right?
is jump ahead a little bit to the background of the March on Washington
Okay.
and preparing
Okay.
Dr. King's remarks.
Okay.
So if you could tell us a little bit about how you all planned for that and how his speech came about and what went into it from sort of behind the scenes.
Okay. Did I set the backdrop about what was happening in the months following the Birmingham demonstrations of the March on Washington? The bottom line is that the success in Birmingham became the spark that ignited a prairie fire of nonviolent protests across the country. Between May and late August of 1963, there were over 1,300 demonstrations, 200 cities, 36 states. Okay? Dr. King, we recognize that something qualitatively had happened. It was happening to the country. So when the civil rights organizations announced at the Roosevelt Hotel in June that they were going to hold a march on Washington, I was surprised. And one of the reasons I was surprised is because I knew that Dr. King had been exhausted. He had been in jail for 8 days in Birmingham. Then he had a big rally in Detroit, Michigan. And I was surprised that he would so readily consent. And apparently he didn't consent. He was slated to go on a vacation with his wife and children, as he customarily does, to either Bahamas or Jamaica. And it became clear I wasn't part of the discussion, but when it became clear that that's what he was thinking about doing, Stanley Levison, Bayard Rustin, said, hold on, Dr. King, you can't go. You need to stay here. And what we'll do is we'll give you a vacation in the States, and we'll ask Clarence and his wife to vacate their newly constructed home so that you and your family can stay there. The only problem is nobody talked to me. Okay? So the next thing I know is that Stanley Levison says that he and Bayard and others had decided that we had to leave our home so that Coretta and Dr. King and their 4 children could stay in our house. And the principal political reason was that we would have access to him domestically, and he would be able to have a vacation while still being available for March on Washington. And so during that period of time, he was writing a book, among other things. And during that period of time, Stanley Levison and I, particularly, even though, again, 2 months earlier, on June 22nd, Stanley had been the subject of a private conversation between President Kennedy and Dr. King. And that conversation very directly was that the president told him he had to get rid of Stanley Levison and Jack Odell, that they had reliable information from the FBI, that Stanley Levison was a high-ranking member of the Communist Party, and so blah, 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 and so was Jack Odell. And so that was like a time bomb. Not a time bomb, it was like a major explosion that somewhat derailed things at the point. But the point is, as the march approached, Stanley and I although it was decided that Stanley would step back with his consent, with his urging, Dr. King did not want to reduce his oral contacts with Stanley, did not want to sever a direct comment. He was very much adamant against it. But Stanley, his attitude was, listen, the movement you're leading is more important than me or the relationship you and I have. If this is what the President, Attorney General want, let's give it to him, let's move on. We have more important things to do. But meanwhile, Stanley and I talked virtually every day on matters involving Dr. King. And at some point during those discussions, what he would say at the march came up. And the question was really a policy question of what kind of speech, you're going to give a public sermon? You're going to give a political treatise, or what kind of speech?
Was it known from the beginning that he would be the last speaker of the day?
Oh, no. You asked a question that maybe you don't know how pregnant it is with controversy. Okay? As a matter of fact, there came a time when the conservative clergymen in the March Committee, through their organizations, they put a proposal out that there should be X number of speakers, let's say 12 speakers, or 10 speakers, and each should have no more than 8 minutes. And they had proposed that Dr. King be in the middle. And I heard that this was going to be a proposal. when I heard this, and Bayard Rustin had shared this with me, and I persuaded Dr. King, I don't want you to come to this meeting of the March Committee. It's better that you not come. And I'm listening, and they said, well, we think that this is the way it should be, and so forth. And I clearly got the sense that there was an effort, I'm not sure other than ego what the reason was, that they wanted to marginalize Dr. King. They wanted to prevent him from being the last speaker, and they didn't, and they wanted to marginalize him. So Dr. King wasn't there, so I could say things that he certainly wouldn't say at this meeting.
And who is they? Who is the?
They is a Bayard Rustin, Wyatt Walker, Wyatt Walker, A. Philip Randolph, Cleveland Robinson, representatives from the UAW, representatives from CORE, representatives from Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, representatives from the NAACP, and representatives from several of the local black churches and representatives from the Archdiocese, Catholic Archdiocese of New York, okay, and someone from the American Jewish Congress. But the black clergy representatives were the ones who were trying to manipulate the power, in my observation. They made a proposal that each person be allowed the same amount of speech, and they had proposed that Dr. King be in the middle of that. So while this discussion was going on, I just said, excuse me, gentlemen, I said, you've all heard Dr. King speak, have you? Have all of you in this room heard Dr. King speak? Yes? Well, tell me something. Do you really want to follow Dr. King? I said, now, when I'm not doing civil rights work, I said, I have a law practice with two other partners, and we do a lot of entertainment work. We represent several artists and performing artists. And I said, in the concert business, there's something called an opening act and a major act. And I said, do you really want to follow Dr. King? And they said, well, why do you say that? I said, well, because quite frankly, you run the risk that after he speaks, I just turned it off. After he speaks, people will. So with some begrudging consent, and what tipped the discussion was A. Philip Randolph. Says, yes, I think that Brother Martin should come, and I agree with Clarence Jones. Most of these people, and I don't want to offend anybody in this room, but most of the people are coming from all over the country. They're coming to hear Dr. King, and we should have him as the last speaker. Okay. And the preparation of the speech was. Some people think that Dr. King came to Washington to sit down and just going to write the speech. He was at the Willard Hotel working on his speech, but the speech that he was working on incorporated, I provided him with information that he could use, if he chose to, in the speech that he was preparing. I did not know until I was standing 50 feet behind him, and he actually spoke. And I listened very carefully. I did not know that after his perfunctory introductory remarks, that as he began speaking, the first opening 6 or 7 paragraphs or more were the draft paragraphs which I put in summary form for him to use. Whether he was tired, whether he liked it, or whether he just, it was pressed for time, but he didn't change a sentence, not a word, a paragraph, or a comma. He spoke verbatim what I had prepared, but what I had prepared was a summary of what we had discussed several times about the kind of things that he should say. I just use a certain degree of drama because I had the problem of raising bail money. I had to go in bail money, and I remember going to the Chase Manhattan Bank to raise some bail money coming up to New York and going in and seeing money from floor to ceiling. And so when I was drafted this, I said, I can't believe, drafted the suggested paragraph, the language. I said, I can't believe that we have assembled here today to redeem the promissory note, to which the signers of the Declaration of Independence all fall heir. I cannot be, and which the present generation is an heir to this promissory note. I cannot believe that in the vaults of justice in the United States that the insufficient funds. So, General, okay. So he's speaking. That's the first time I had any idea that he was going to incorporate the actual suggested language. I had no idea until then.
Because your normal process is you'd give him a draft and he would work with it.
Yeah, right. And this is the normal process too. He didn't use everything. He didn't use all of the paragraphs, but he used the first 6 or 7 of the paragraphs, and then he added his own paragraphs. And then as he is speaking from this written, prepared text, his favorite gospel singer, Mahalia Jackson, shouts out to him. She had performed earlier on the program. Tell him about the dream, Martin. Tell him about the dream. And I'm watching him. And in real time, he acknowledges her. But then he takes the prepared written text and moves it to the left side of the lectern and grabs the left side of the lectern and starts to speak. And I turned to the person sitting next to me, standing next to me, whoever that person was, if they're still living. I said, these people don't know it, but they're about ready to go to church. And I said that because I saw Dr. King's body language change. So that the part of the speech that the nation and the world celebrates, the so-called I Have a Dream speech, was completely spontaneous, was completely extemporaneous. And but for the last part where he's looking at notes in the end about this Negro, he was quoting a poem about a Negro, free at last, which is from a hymn from a Protestant clergyman many years earlier. Everything else was spontaneous, everything. Now, as I say in my book, Behind the Dream, The Making of the Speech That Transformed the Nation, you know, I'd heard Martin King and saw him speak many times. I'm not suggesting, well, whatever your belief, whatever your religious belief, if any, whatever your belief in spirituality or transcendentalism, if any, I can only tell you what I experienced and what I saw. And what I experienced and what I saw, I had never up until that time in my life, anyone, including Dr. King, I had never heard Dr. King speak that way before. It is as if some cosmic, powerful force came down and took over his body, that there was the same body I was looking at, but something had taken it over because the words, the way he said it was so powerful. And I think it was the combination of the beauty of the day, 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the beauty of the day, the situs, the venue, the Lincoln Memorial, the more than 250,000 people at that time. No place in America had that many people ever assembled in one place at one time, peacefully, 25% of whom were white. No place. And something happened in the interaction between what Martin was saying and that audience, so that never, ever again, until he is never ever again in his lifetime had I ever heard him speak that way. Now people will say, well, you know, he gave a very moving speech on April 3rd, 1968 in the Masonic Temple. Moving speech, depressed, talk about I've been to the mountaintop. In terms of the political content, well, the letter from the Birmingham jail was a much more profound political statement. The speech on April 4th, 1967, The Time to Break the Silence, a much more political, profound statement on nonviolence, both internationally and nationally. But the power of his simple message, because he was calling for America. He was summoning America's conscience so that the nation could be as good as it was intended to be. I don't know whether I've said this to you before, but the genius of Martin Luther King Jr., the political genius, was that he knew, and we knew, that no matter how compelling and how fair the case for ending racial segregation was on its merits, there was no way that 12% of the population was going to impose that point of view, no matter how fair and compelling on the merits. On 88% of the population was going to happen. Okay? In spite of our friends on the black left and the white left, who said the only thing the white man understands is a gun and a kick in the butt. Anyone who wanted to counsel violence on the part of 12% of the population against 88% of the population is counseling political suicide. Yes, we were students of the revolutions of the undeveloped country. We were students of the Algerian War and Zimbabwe and Kenya and Ghana and Egypt. We understood, okay, but we understood the peculiarities of the American experience. So therefore, the genius of Martin Luther King was that he would summon the conscience of America through peaceful, nonviolent confrontation with racial segregation, so that the conscience of the 88% of the country would be forced to see the contradiction between the way in which it treated 12% of its people of color, and the commandments in the Declaration of Independence and our Constitution. But guess what? To Dr. King, it wasn't a constitutional or legal question for America. It was a moral question. And he raised the level, he raised in the level of the 88%, raised the question in their minds as whether this is the kind of nation they want to be. Is it morally right to deny 12% of the population full access to equal protection of the laws, equal opportunity to vote, solely based on the color of their skin? That was his political genius. I guess I told you the phrase from Du Bois about if the lions don't tell their story. I've told you that, okay? I think it's important for future generations that they be unambiguously clear as to the power and the meaning of the I Have a Dream speech in the March on Washington. I don't want people to get caught up in the so-called nostalgia of commemorating the 50th anniversary of the March and overlook the centrality of what that was about. Was it the greatest speech in terms of political content of his career? I've already said, I don't think so. But what Martin King did is that I talk about him having taken America on a journey to overcome its... Well, you have to appreciate the commemoration of Martin's 50th anniversary. You have to understand what happened, what America was going through. What was America going through? America had become like a dysfunctional alcoholic or drug addict, had become addicted on racial segregation, dependency, okay? And had tried unsuccessfully to break its addiction and dependency. Mm-hmm. And Martin King took America, conscience by the hand, and said, I'm going to take you on a road of peaceful, redemptive recovery to recover your soul. And I'm going to do this non-violently. I'm going to do it telling you I love you every step of the way. I'm going to do it to let you know no matter what you say to me, no matter what you do to me, you can call me all sorts of names. You can put me in jail. You can bomb my house. You can threaten me. But at the end of all of those things, I'm still going to love you. Because my compassion and love for your soul and for you to redeem the best of what this country is to be, my compassion, my commitment to do that is greater than your, and greater and stronger than anything you can do to me. Greater than stronger. Because I believe in you, America. You may not believe in yourself, but I can believe in you. And so that when I tell you I have a dream, I'm not speaking about the present tense. I'm speaking prophetically in the future. I know I have absolute confidence. Not now, maybe on August 28, 1963, but I believe that one day, my 4 children, I may be alive, I may not be alive. We may not be around, you don't know, but one day, this country that I believe in, my 4 children will be judged by the content of their character and not by the color of their skin. It may not be happening today, and it may not happen tomorrow. It may not happen in your lifetime or my lifetime. But one day, your conscience will come to see the immorality of racial segregation, the immorality of racism, so that one day the great-great-grandsons of slaves and the great-great-grandsons of slave owners will sit down one day at the table of brotherhood. I believe that that will happen, America, even though you may at this time may not believe it yourself. You want to commemorate the 50th anniversary of Martin King? That's what you got to remember. Got to remember, in 1963, Martin King in Birmingham put a moral stake in the ground. And on the top of that stake was a mariner's compass. Okay? And that mariner's compass became a moral compass. And what he did was to show the way of how we have got to live up to be the best that we can be. Otherwise, the country is not going to be governable. It's not a question of black people having power over white people. It's not a question of white people having power over black people. It's a question of co-equally participating in a power based on an indestructible commitment to the uniqueness of the speciality and dignity of the human personality. Everybody is somebody. So that in 2013, when I hear particularly people from the African American conservative church community tell me that it's against God's will, that homosexuality is a sin, it's against God's will, and I am never going to be in support of same-sex marriage. I'm never going to be in support. Homosexuality is a sin. So I say to them, I was raised in a Christian religious principle, and I was raised to believe that we were all created in God's image. So tell me, those of you who are so opposed to the LGBT people, isn't it funny that God must really love gay and lesbian people? Because otherwise, why would he keep creating so many of them? I rest my case. Okay. The commemoration of this anniversary is a commemoration to America's quintessential preeminent apostle of nonviolence. And just as the nation had to deal with asking itself, what kind of people are we, when it looked at, on the front pages of its newspapers, of fire hoses slamming little black boys and girls against the walls in Birmingham, Alabama, or police dogs against black boys and girls who were demonstrating peacefully. Just as the nation had to ask itself, what kind of nation are we that we would do this? After Newtown, Connecticut, when you have 20 babies and 16 adult schools, you want to commemorate the 50th anniversary of Martin King's legacy, knowing that he was the preeminent apostle of nonviolence? You have to ask yourself, what kind of nation are we that we would permit this to happen? So I don't know what different people are going to be doing on the 28th of August, 2013, in Birmingham and Cleveland, Ohio, and Washington, D.C., and Philadelphia, and all the nations throughout all the countries and communities across this nation. But I can tell you one thing. There can be no more true commemoration to his legacy than if this nation, like the network executive, like the executive in the movie Network, if an overwhelming majority of American people on the 28th of August, 2013, saying, enough is enough. I'm sick and tired. We're sick and tired of violence. I'm not going to take it anymore. Violence is destroying this great country. It would be a sacrilege to go through the motions of commemorating his legacy without tying the legacy to the existential violence that is in our country today, the ubiquitous presence of violence. And we can do something about it. We can do something about it. Martin King would say, come on, America, you're better than this. We don't have to continue gun violence, just that we don't have to continue racial segregation. We can end it if we want to. So I don't want to hear "We Shall Overcome," and I don't want to hear all these commemorative songs. What is going to be done 24/7, August 28th, 2013, to deal with the question of the ubiquitous violence that is affecting our young people particularly, and the unevenness of the effects of that violence? In some cases, regrettably, it has to be clinically described as black-on-black violence. What do I mean? I mean by young black people, men, using guns to kill one another over some failed drug deal, or over somebody stepped on their sneakers, or some crazy nonsense. You want to honor the memory of Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech? Then you have the courage to recognize the fundamental qualitative changes that are taking place. in many of the households in the African American community. And that is the substantial destruction of the family structure with a male in the house on a constant basis. I'm not talking about husband and wife, I'm talking about a responsible male, responsible female. So that, for example, here in San Francisco, you have an organization called the Omega Boys Club. The Omega Boys Club, run by Dr. Joe Marshall, he recognizes this. He recognizes that if you ever want to have the chance of saving a generation of urban youth, you've got to find a substitute equivalency to the parental structure of discipline which they don't have. And so that in effect, the programs he offers at the Boys Club is the program of parental or adult structured discipline that they don't get at home. But that adult structured discipline is enough to keep them alive and free. I was once having a discussion with Dr. Marshall in which I said, you know, Joe, the most important days in the most important historical dates in the history of the African American nation, African American people, 1619 when slavery was introduced in the United States, and 1863, the Emancipation Proclamation. He said, no, Clarence, you omitted a very important date. He says, what's that? He says, 1980. I said, what happened in 1980? He says, that's when crack cocaine was introduced into the African American community. That so fundamentally changed it. To be a good preacher, Dr. King once said to me, you not only need to know your scripture, and you need to be conversant with the underlying teachings, but you have to have the ability to tell your audience a story. You got to tell the story. And the story can be any number of things. The story can be about redemption. The story can be about, but you got to tell a story that people can buy into. So I am suggesting for those people who listen and read about this time in American history, as we approach the 50th anniversary of the I Have a Dream speech, that the story of this generation is the story of this extraordinary man who sought to save the soul of America. That's the story.
Thank you.
We're back, aren't we? Back.
But, well, unfortunately, we only have about 5 more minutes.
Okay.
By way of wrapping up, I wanted to ask, what other...
It will allow us enough time to sign. I'm going to sign this book
great,
before you go.
great.
Right, Graham.
What other parts of Dr. King's journey, as you were talking about his journey and his legacy, do we need to honor as we think about him at this time, approaching this anniversary? And I'm thinking in terms of other work such as his work.
They're going to say,
poverty.
no, it's very clear. What you have to honor is his unshakable commitment to end the inequity of wealth disparity, okay? At the time of his assassination, he was working the template that he was involved in, of course, was the garbage strike. But that was just a template of an example to highlight the issue of wealth and income disparity in this nation. Ironically, the movement of Occupy Wall Street in 2011, that's what it was about. That's what it was about. And by the way, this was not a movement of impoverished black people. This is not a movement of impoverished white people. This is a movement of largely middle class, principally white people, who somehow began to see that there's something very unfair about a system of which they play by all of the rules. They go and get a good education. They keep themselves out of trouble. And they try to apply their skills, and they recognize that even if they do everything that they've asked to be done, they're going to have, at best, a marginal participation in the benefits of this country. And that's not morally right. Listen to me. That's not morally right. So what other things should we think about his legacy? His unshakable commitment. What prompted his opposition, public opposition to the war in Vietnam, was not only his opposition and detest of the application of violence on an international scale, but he was not stupid. He recognized that no matter what Lyndon Johnson said in his heart about the war on poverty, there was no way that a war on poverty can be fought when you're taking the resources, the dollars of the Treasury of the United States, and you're taking those dollars to buy armaments. There's no way, there's no way. So it's a sham. So again, the reason he opposed the war was a moral reason. He realized, aside from his absolute opposition to violence, he realized that it was just impossible. It was politically and economically impossible for the President of the United States to utter well-meaning words about fighting poverty when there was no money to do it. It was being spent to kill North Vietnamese. So that's the other part of his legacy. And of course, militarism. I think, and this is controversial because it's my interpretation, I'm asked directly, what do I think Martin King would say about same-sex marriage? I said, I don't know, in fact, what he would say. But I can interpret his body of work. And I can interpret what I think he would say. And I think he would come down on what I said earlier, when people would say, well, homosexuality is a sin and so forth. And I think Martin King would get beyond that. He says, it's not about all the things you object to. It's about an elementary thing called love and compassion. Remember, the principal founding injunction of his Christianity was love thy enemy. That's what it was founded on, love thy enemy. Okay? So, I'm very pleased that you spent this time with me.
Thank you so much.
Hey, it was an honor.
Really.
Okay, this is one lion that wanted to tell a story so that the hunters won't get all the credit.
Right on.
Amen.
Right on. Thank you very
You
much.
may have this,
Yeah.
have a pen.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress and the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture. This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress and the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture.